Hello, viewers. This is your host, Dhiren Mehta, once again from the Global Perspective. We are new age crowdsourced recording media that aims to provide voice to opinion makers that bring alternate perspectives that very often the mainstream media doesn't want to show, because the mainstream media, as we all know, are mostly controlled by corporates and lobbyists serving to special interest groups. We are committed to make honest efforts to bring views from the alternate perspective on the relevant issues, and also make sure that those views are balanced views. In our last couple of programs, we did cover about coronavirus that has caused devastation across the globe. We talked about the pandemic management. We talked about the origins of the virus also. We talked about the politics that has caused so much of confusion. We also talked in last program about what is needed to contain and restructure some of the global organizations, especially WHO, because it has become Chinese puppet. Today, we are going to talk about the need for the new alliances for the new era. We need new alliances to deal with the current issues that the world is facing, and that's what our panelists will talk today. On panel, we have Amjad Mirza. Amjad Mirza is from the Mirpur, from Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. He has lived in China for several years, where he did his medicine, and later on moved back to Pakistan, where he did some practice. But because of his views against Pakistan, because of his views or because of his voice that he has been raising against Pakistan, the atrocities that they are making, and against China for the China-Pakistan alliances, he had to exile because of the threat to his life, and he is currently living in exile in UK. We also have Arif Aajakia. Arif is a human rights defender. He's been actively involved in the Human Rights Council, contributing to it almost every year, 10 weeks since 1995. Arif was a mayor of one of the town of Karachi in Pakistan from 2005 to 2007. And despite being mayor, he could not voice his views freely in Pakistan and is currently living again in UK. We have David Vance. Hey, David. David is a well-known author and co-founder of news media, Alt News Media. He's very active on social media, and he doesn't mince his words. He says his views in a manner that sometimes people view very controversial, but he has audacity to talk what he believes and doesn't get into the political correctness. He's very critical of how UK has been handling many of the affairs, including the COVID pandemic management, UK's political correctness, etc., etc. And we also have Francios Gautier, who is a journalist and writer. He has been covering Southeast Asia for last 35 years. He's a chief editor of one of the leading magazine, French magazine. Francois is also having a hobby and passion about the real Indian history, and he has built one of the largest private museum in India, highlighting the real Indian history. So welcome to the panel. We'll start with the opening statement from each of you panelists. The topic today is the need for new alliances for the new era. So starting in alphabetical order, Amjad, will you go ahead and talk about your thoughts, and then Arif, you can go ahead, and David and Francois in that order.
Thank you very much for having me. And I would say that since the Second World War, there was the Marshall Plan, and there was the this all reorganization of global economy, and then we entered the phase of globalization, which basically from nationalized economies we moved towards free market economy, unregulated market capitalism. And we saw the reorganization of international production. And that reorganization of international production brought forth new players in the global market. Now, one thing that happened that took place during globalization was that from one-sided dependence on finance capital, there was interdependence of monopoly, domestic monopolies with international finance capital. So we see that interdependence start to play a major role in deciding the breakup of or the vulnerability of old alliances and the need for new alliances, especially after the 2008 financial crisis till 2014. That I think decisively challenged the logic of old alliances, the basis on which the old alliances was formed. We see China from a nationalized socialist economy moving towards a Friedmanian open market economy. We see India where Indian investment starts to go into other countries. I give you an example of Bharti Airtel, which took, it's a mobile company which took about mobile network of 15 African countries. Adani mining company invested in Australia in the construction of Carmichael coal mine. Then there is Turkey, then there is Iran, there's Saudi Arabia, there's Qatar, there's Russia. So we see that there is a lot of interdependence and a lot of competition between these new emerging economies to compete with each other to get more and more share of the regional market initially, and then if possible a chunk of global economy as well. So my opening statement, I will end on saying this, that I think the old alliances which were mostly dictated by the need of finance capital hegemony of Western countries, has now been seriously challenged by the poor ex-colonial countries, and so there is definitely a need for for formation of new alliances. Thank you.
Thanks. Arif, would you like to go?
Thank you, Mehtaji. And hi, David. Hi, Francois. Hi, Amjad bhai. I hope you all are doing well. As we discussed last week about COVID-19, the Chinese virus, now as we are discussing the alliances, the new alliances, well, the alliances we had after Second World War were mostly, they turned into Cold War, communism and capitalism. And the communism at that time was led by Soviet Union, and they tried to infiltrate in eastern part of Europe, Central Asia, and going on to even India, mostly was in that bloc. Now that alliance, Cold War has finished, Soviet Union is past. That alliance and those alliances have expired almost, because NATO and all these organizations, they became into action after World War, when decolonization of the world was happening. So of course the new countries emerging were under the impression and under the pressure of their ex-colonial masters. So now, after 70 years of that period, those countries like India, like Gulf states, many countries have emerged as regional powers and regional important economic centers. So new alliances are already in function, as we can see that the historical trade routes that used to be, for example, Kerala, then northern eastern part of Africa, that those historical trade routes which were disclosed by Vasco da Gama and the explorers. Now China has silently since last 25 years has taken major ports in those trade routes, like Mombasa in Kenya, like Djibouti in the northern eastern corner of Africa touching Saudi Arabia. Then China is in Gwadar, then China is in Iran, China is in Africa. So the alliance is already, we can see in international organizations where China has used these smaller countries because of their voting power. In international organization, a large country has one vote and a small country has one vote. So smaller countries vote carry equal weight to the vote of United States of America or India. So there are new alliances. China has already captured emerging economies. Now, after World War, when we had those alliances, France had total influence on Africa. British had total influence on their own ex-colonies like South Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on. Now those influence have decreased. You cannot say that Pakistan is a British puppet now. Pakistan is of course a puppet, but Pakistan keeps changing masters. Like it is under impression of America, going towards China, going towards Saudi Arabia. So new alliances have to become a reality now, which are functioning unofficially. Now India, once being in communist bloc, is so close to USA now. So you cannot say that those alliances are existing. They exist only on paper. We need concrete new alliances to stop imperialistic mindsets of some dangerous countries of the world.
Thank you. That was a good one. David, you want to go ahead, please?
Yeah, I mean, just following on from what Arif said, that of course things change, circumstances change. So, you know, I guess the most successful global alliance that we've seen in the past half a century has been NATO. And as been pointed out, NATO was formed in the aftermath of World War II, consists of 30 countries now, 28 countries in Europe, and the US and Canada. So it's a 30-country alliance. It was put in place to defeat the communist menace constituted by the USSR. And happily, that communist menace fell, as we all know. But that was like, you know, what, 20, 30 years ago. So things move on. And for me, although things move on, sometimes they stay the same. Because back after World War II, we faced a communist menace in the form of the Soviet Union. We now face a communist menace with a difference in the form of China. And China is a much different kind of global threat from my perspective, because, you know, the Soviet Union wasn't that successful in penetrating our economies. It put their spies all over the place, but they didn't infiltrate into our every way of life. China has. China has been very successful in buying up huge chunks of the world, either directly or indirectly. So what we face now in 2020 is a scenario whereby a global power, which, as Arif said, has got imperialistic ambition to become the global superpower by 2040. They've made it clear. After 100 years of humiliation, they want to be number one. And I believe that China does constitute an existential and a political menace in the region, but also in every country, you know, US, UK, everywhere, Europe. So what that means is, quite obviously, we now need to form new alliances, new ways of dealing with the single biggest menace that we face. And that single biggest menace has a name, and the name of that menace is China.
Thanks, David. Francios, please go ahead.
Right, so I'm in agreement with David. I live in India. And I have seen close hands the danger that China can be, the ruthlessness, as well as the intelligence, and the cold-blooded intelligence of the Chinese towards India. So I believe for a long time that the danger to the world today is China, because China has a very strong will to dominate the world, and they have the economic power, they have the political power, they have the military power, they have the nuclear power. So after the coronavirus, this has even increased because the world has realized, or is slowly realizing, because of the coronavirus threat, the true face of China. In fact, coronavirus has been a great help to all of us because of coronavirus, the world is looking differently at China. Before that, the world, has been rushing to China for the last 30 years to invest there, closing an eye on whatever is happening within China, whatever is happening in Tibet, whatever is happening vis-a-vis India. So because of coronavirus, the world is slowly waking up to the danger that China is. Now, the new alliances that I see are going to need India because India has a 3,000 border with China. Part of it, of course, is Tibet, but India has a huge border with China. India has the manpower, India has the army, and India has the nuclear power. India knows about China. So if there are alliances, India is going to play a very vital role in these new alliances with the United States, of course, because whatever the faults of the United States, it still remains, and it has, in the last 100 years, it has come to the help of the world whenever democracy and freedom was threatened. So United States and India will play a vital role. Nobody mentions Tibet, but for me, Tibet is very important because it is the roof of the world, and China has seized Tibet. It's placed nuclear weapons there. It is threatening the world from Tibet. And of course, the Dalai Lama is an extraordinary person. I have been privileged to meet him so many times. And I believe that there's a chance for Tibet also to regain its freedom if there's an internal turmoil in China. And that is very important for the world. A free Tibet is, from a geopolitical point of view, is very important for the world. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, panelists. And we will now get into the first segment. Thank you so much. So welcome to the segment one. This segment is about the relevance of existing alliances. So before we talk about the new alliances, let's talk about some of the existing alliances and their relevances, right? So David, we just briefly talked in the opening statement about NATO, and NATO was, and you brought up that point that NATO was formed to counter USSR and communism, and it succeeded very well. But today the global scenario has changed. USS to a great extent has been contained, and in fact it is aligning with China for rebringing to strengthen its relevance again and to take its objective further. It is actually aligning with China. So the new threat is different today. Do we need to reform NATO, or do we even dismantle NATO and bring completely new alliance?
Yeah, I mean, it's really good questions. And I suppose the answer is that just looking at it objectively, I think NATO has probably outlived its usefulness in its current structure, because the Soviet Union is gone. And not only that, but with President Trump in the White House, I mean, we're seeing NATO countries who are mostly European countries, being rightly challenged because they've sat back for decades and allowed the United States to fund their protection against what was the old Soviet Union. And as Trump has rightly pointed out, these NATO countries, they're not paying their fair share of the bill. So I think he's absolutely right. Now, countries like the UK have done, but Germany, being the most egregious example, hasn't. France and the rest of them have not paid what they should have paid. But in a way, even that's irrelevant, because that structure was put in place to protect against the menace from the old USSR. So we have to move the conversation on then. And I mean, one other thing about NATO, by the way, Turkey is a member of NATO. I've got a problem with Turkey because I think Turkey under Caliphate Erdogan is again a menace and I would like to see it thrown out of any arrangement, because I don't think it's good in terms of its intentions, and where Turkey sees itself would concern me. So we need to move on, and we need to move on in the simple context of identifying, well, what is the biggest threat facing the world at the moment? And as Francois pointed out, and rightly so, COVID-19 has helped us identify that. If you didn't know before this year where the world's problems, many problems originate, China, that's your answer. So we know that there's a fundamental problem with an imperial Chinese dynasty which has risen up, pretty much as you've said, Dhiren, almost unrecognized. It's funny that for years, with the Bill Clintons and Obamas and the White House and whatnot, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of concern about China's motives, but maybe less than impure. And so it has proven. So we know now that China's existential threat, again, as has been pointed out by some of my fellow panelists, we know that not new nations, but important nations like India, for example, like Australia, for example. I mean, there's plenty of them around the world. Yep. These are the countries, Dhiren, that need to come together and form, if you like, NATO 2.0. Because we need an upgrade, don't we? We need to upgrade the global alliance against the tyranny. And the tyranny at the moment is the Communist China Party in China.
Thank you. So Mr. Amjad, so if you look at the Shanghai Corporation Organization, or SCO as it is called, the whole SCO is structured around power center of China. It is specifically designed to support Chinese objectives like One Belt, One Road and other Chinese, it is very supportive of all those initiatives of China. So why sovereign countries should participate in SCO? And is it not foolish on countries, powerful countries like India, to join SCO? Do you see SCO being a real meaningful alliance that can serve a global objectives, or it is more centered around China's selfish interest?
Well, I think that this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, both India and Pakistan got their membership only in 2017. They got full membership of that.
Yes.
And it's a China-centric organization, of course, that there's no doubt about that. And in this alliance, Russia backs India and China backs Pakistan. Now, I think that there is a hidden agenda behind the formation of South China Organization, and it's twofold. First of all, it is to get control of the Central Asian route, which used to be called the main artery in the British Raj days. And the second is to clandestinely make maneuvers in order to get into regional organizations like ASEAN and SAARC and stuff like that, so that it can have its finger influence in every pie. Yeah. So now, if someone is, a few of our participants, panelists have mentioned about the existential crisis. I think that if anybody is facing an existential crisis right now as we speak, it is us, the people of POK, Gilgit-Baltistan, from where the One Belt, One Road project, which is actually One Belt, One Road, is made in China for China project, and it has got six programs, one of which is CPAC. And it's a they call it a trade route, but in order to make sure that this trade route is safe, they need bases, they need naval bases, they need control of the dry ports. So Gwadar and even Port Qasim, His Excellency, our mayor from Karachi is here, who would know better than him how dangerous the situation can be if our ports go in the hands of China. So I think that this is Shanghai. Now the question whether India should be in Shanghai Cooperation Organization or not, I think we should be in SCO. The reason is that if we go out, then it's like, moving out of a room, you don't know what's being discussed. At least we should be there to throw our weight behind arguments that could block China's expansionist designs. You see Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. That is the main goal of China, to control it and to and also, as I said, to seek membership of South Asian Association of Regional Corporations, SAARC,
Got it.
and also of Bay of Bengal Initiative for multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation. And similar, now the big question is, how can Shanghai Cooperation Organization be made productive and progressive when India is principally opposed to the CPAC? That is the big question. So there can be no homogeneity in SCO. It's a group of antagonist forces brought in together. It's like
Yes.
in wrestling they show that there's cage fight. So the fighter cannot escape the cage. So we have been put in a cage. Okay, go and sort yourself out. So I think that the world, if you want to defeat China, we are the key. As Gilgit-Baltistan is the key to that. And India should have a comprehensive policy to reclaim this territory, because it is Indian territory. It was occupied by Pakistan army. And but as I think the gentleman's name is David with the green screen, as he mentioned that the alliances have to, and Francis as well mentioned that our alliances have to be in this context, that the main emerging evil that is going to swallow us, with a gulp, is China. And how do we form this? And in this picture, I see that India and America can play a decisive role. But saying that does not mean that we should become a puppet or a satellite state of America. I'm saying that there should be joint military, diplomatic, and economic sanction-wise. There should be consultations between the United States of America and the Republic of India, how to use diplomatic efforts to block China. As we see, the United Nations seems to be now playing in the hands of China. The World Health Organization now, can you believe it? It's like a Chinese health organization. So diplomatically and then economically, boycott Chinese goods is not enough. How do we make multinational companies who have invested in China, how do we make India more attractive for them so that we get them out of China, and that dependency of multinationals on Chinese, on the trade benefits of free economic zones and cheap labor and all that China has offered them. How can we facilitate better environment for those companies in India and other countries as well? I'm not saying that we should have a India hegemonic policy of everyone from China should come to India, but since India is a very big country, and we have got the infrastructure, we've got the labor, we've got the manpower, and we have got a nationalist BJP government in power. So it is more business friendly environment in India right now.
Got it.
Pakistan is an extended arm of China's military and China's foreign, department, foreign policy department. Now, Pakistan is suffering from something I call delusional. You know, if you have seen Harry Ramzan program of cooking, he goes in. He goes into a kitchen to fix it, and he has an argument with the chef, with the owner, and the owner disagrees that his restaurant is not running properly and that the food is not cooked properly and all that. He is delusional. Pakistan is suffering from the same situation, but we should be forming an alliance with Baloch movement. We should have a new alliance, regional alliance of oppressed nations of Pakistan. Baloch.
Got it.
Now, very important development that I think international media has still not taken notice of is that in Sindh, the Mahajar Qawmi movement, MQM, which is basically people who migrated from India to Pakistan, and the local Sindhis, they were antagonist forces. Like the Sindhis were, always against the Mahajars and stuff like that. For the first time, the leader of MQM, Mr. Altaf Hussain, has publicly announced that they will join the Sindhis in their endeavor to liberate Sindh from Pakistan and form a new country called Sindhu Desh. This is a very big development, and India should grab it with both hands. So the Balochistan and Sindhi alliance, plus we from Gilgit-Baltistan and West Jammu, which is Azad Kashmir. This alliance has to be, consolidated ASAP. This alliance, if it is developed, if it is financed, if it is consolidated, if it is coordinated, trust me, this will be like a biggest defeat to Chinese expansionism.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think you had, you have a very good perspective being from Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So, Francois, in your opening statement, right, you talked about that because of COVID, there has been recognition amongst many countries about the threat of China. And I would equate it to something called boiled frog syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of boiled frog, but if you put a frog into water, which is slowly boiling, slowly heating up and boiling, the frog doesn't recognize that. The frog stays into the water and it dies. It dies of, it gets boiled and dies. But if you suddenly increase the temperature or put frog in a very hot temperature, so if there's a sudden change in the temperature, then frog realizes and jumps out of it. I think the COVID has kind of suddenly changed the temperature, and many frogs, like many countries, were boiling into it without realizing that they will die or they will kind of get swallowed by China, as Amjad said. Do you think that now world is recognizing, and I will extend this discussion to why the BRIC is relevant today? BRIC was actually, the whole term BRIC was formed by, Jim O'Neill of Goldman, talking about 4 countries like, India, China, Russia, and Brazil will be the new emerging growing power. But does it make sense just because of somebody thinking of that you go and form alliance? I thought it was a very stupid idea to even create an alliance just because these 4 countries were thought to be growing fast and somebody just goes and creates alliance. So do you think BRIC is relevant anymore when India and China and even Russia and India is kind of coming, kind of not as strong alliance as it was before? And Russia and China are also kind of, teaming up together against other democracies. Is BRIC anywhere relevant?
Well, I think when BRIC was founded in 2006, as you said, with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and later South Africa, it made sense at that time to act as a counterpower to the US influence in the world, and the fact that BRICS had 44% of the world population, nearly 3 billion people, and that emerging countries like India were there and Brazil, along with Russia and China, South Africa, it made sense at that time. But things have changed, of course, because of the coronavirus, and since then, even Brazil, has come, has clashed with China because China has invested heavily in Brazil,
Yes.
and Brazil is indebted to China, as many other countries are in the world, whether Sri Lanka or Africa, and so many countries are indebted to China. So there is a clash. Of course, India and China have clashed. Recently, they're clashing now in Ladakh. China is making intrusions into Ladakh. Lack of a common ideology in BRICS. And now again, after the coronavirus, BRICS seems to me irrelevant. Although I think there was a meeting last month, or maybe in April, online meeting of all the BRICS nations that decided to to earmark $15 billion for fighting with the coronavirus. So BRIC is still alive. Whether it's going to survive, in the next few years with China building that new Silk Road in the Himalayas, and intruding in Ladakh, and the Hong Kong problem, and so I think a new alliance needs to be made, and India should look more towards nations that have problems with China, like Vietnam, the Philippines, so many nations have problems with China and would join a new alliance. So that seems to me the natural successor of BRICS. Thank you.
Thanks. So Amjad, you spoke about Gilgit-Baltistan, and especially talked about the China Economic Corridor, China-Pakistan CPEC, that's going through Gilgit-Baltistan and Pakistan illegally occupied part of Kashmir. So Arif, coming to you on that, since you are from that part of the world as well, what do you see the implication of the OBOR or CPEC going through this part of the Pakistan, including Balochistan as well, and capturing Gwadar port and kind of creating a route out of that? How do you see the local implications of that on the people and on the various organizations, companies, or politicians in Pakistan?
Mehtaji, thank you. Before coming to your question, I would like to share some things from David, Francois, and you about that frog thing. Since we brought in WTO, slowly we started boiling the water, and American frogs and British frogs and European frogs were slowly getting used to the temperature of water. And China kept increasing the temperature, and we did not realize, and finally now we are dying. Suddenly this COVID, a sudden change in the temperature, has given us realization that the world has divided, which we realized but we never accepted. The expansion of China. For example, now we see the clearly divided world. One is democratic world, where public voices, the public representatives, true democracies, like Europe, like America, like India, and there are statocracies. There are countries which are ruled by theocracies, like China, like Russia, like Pakistan, so on. Arabic countries like Gulf states, which are very big economic and energy resource region, very important region, though controlled by United States of America, but they are theocracies. So world is clearly divided in two parts. We are starting to wage a movement against white supremacists. Who is sponsoring these movements? Like Hindutva. They are saying there is Hindutva increasing in India, There is white supremacism is increasing in Europe, in America. Why we are no more talking about Islamic terrorism? These movements are taken over, they are hijacked. We saw a Pakistani student girl throwing a petrol bomb in a police car. The genuine protests in New York. And the genuine protests for the genuine agenda, there are some issues that people are facing. I won't say that only black people are facing racism, because blacks are also racist against white. If you will speak with a black Afro-descendant person, he will definitely have some grudge against white people. So the racism and these issues are dying because somebody has taken up, hijacked the movement. Now, Mehta Sahab, with last point, I will come to your question. China is expanding, not from now, since last 50 years. Taiwan, the so powerful world, is not able to recognize Taiwan. Why?
Yes.
Because of a threat of China. China has already usurped Hong Kong, which was secured through international agreements in 1997 before going to Chinese control of an autonomous Hong Kong. Nobody is, we just watch Chinese, Hong Kong people are fighting for their rights, but we did nothing for them. The same thing is happening in India. There is a problem the majority Hindus are facing in India. Since centuries, they are subjugated and they have been made to live a life of a slave. Now, if some people are saying that equal rights, it is called Hindutva. Who is sponsoring these movements? Pakistan, China, these stratocracies are sponsoring these. Tibet was not a China, is not a China. Total different religion, total different demography, total different cultural values. But Tibet is occupied by China, we are watching it. As Amjad Bhai said, Gilgit-Baltistan, POK is occupied by Pakistan, we cannot do anything. So strong alliances are needed. What we made a mistake when we made last alliances, that we created Islamic Brotherhood. We created Jamaat-e-Islami. We created Tablighi Jamaat. We created Devband Madrasas, all created by British, recorded in the history. Those weapons went to Pakistan, the organizations. China, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, they are theocracies. So this is the problem, that we need new alliances to stop the expansionist China. Now, implications of CPEC. CPEC has changed total demography of the area from where it passes. It is starting from Gilgit-Baltistan. Local people are living like a slave there because there are imperialist Punjabis and Chinese living there. There are colonies because all the building contracts are shared between Chinese army and Punjabi army. Pakistan is nowhere there. It is CPEC is a project between Pakistan's army and China. Public is not manufacturing. Go to Gwadar. You will be surprised to see that it is a new Dubai emerging. When you will see the population, it will be Chinese, Punjabis, Muhajirs of Karachi, billionaires. Where are the local indigenous people? They are living in slum dogs and in poor areas like slaves. The demography has changed. CPEC has made Pakistan a colonial state. People are getting used to it. Like we saw that suddenly Chinese people started getting married to Pakistani women. Pakistani women were going to China. What happened? There were thousands of women. Then they were sold to brothels in China. And then their organs were traded. This all happened. We had stories. Pakistan had no power. Pakistan had no will to fight against this because we are a colony of China. And it is not only this thing. When the Chinese virus was explored in Wuhan, entire world was bringing back their citizens. But Pakistan said, no, we cannot bring our citizen, otherwise China will be angry. So this is the poor status of CPEC, that we are a colony of Pakistan. Balochistan, Sindh, KPK, Gilgit-Baltistan, POK. These are colonies of an amalgamation of Punjabi army and Chinese army.
Got it. Thank you. So we did discuss in this segment about relevance of some of the existing global alliances. Of course, we are not covering all the alliances. We are covering alliances that are relevant from today's discussion or today's situation standpoint. There are many other global alliances. It has its own, they have their own objectives, etc. But let's focus on this. And in the next segment, we'll talk about, given that some of these old alliances are no more relevant and need restructuring, let's talk about what the new alliances should look like, which countries should be part of it, what should be the charter of the alliances, right? So see you in the next segment. Thank you so much. Welcome back, viewers, into our second segment. In our first segment, we talked about some of the old alliances, their relevance, and what is needed today to counter the new threat. In this segment, we'll talk about what are the alliances that we need today to counter the threat, the new threat, and that is everybody recognizes is China. Like the threat USSR, maybe 40 years, 50 years back, the new threat is China, and we need new alliances. One of the important points that came out is that some of the alliances have no democratic countries in that, or they have countries that are theocratic, as Arif Bhai said. So should the new alliances strictly have only the countries that believe in democracy and practice democracy? Because that's the challenge we see in the world organizations also, that are supposed to run on democracy, but we have countries that do not practice democracy are having more control on those institutions. So let's talk about the new alliances in that context as well. Many of the panelists talked about need for India and US to be at the center of the new alliances. So let me ask about, in 2015, US redesignated Asia Pacific region as Indo-Pacific region. Does it say a lot? Does that redesignation have a lot of relevance? And most of you talked about that. So there is something that, let's talk about that. And my question to Francois, what do you see redesignation of Asia Pacific as Indo-Pacific? What does that hold?
Much before the coronavirus this time, if you look at the map of Asia, you will see that China has seized a number of small islands and fortified them and extended them. Of course, the main one is the Spratly Island, but there are many of them. And if you look at them, you will see that China controls the sea, a very important sea lane. So there is China, there is Taiwan, there is the Philippines, there is Vietnam, there is Brunei, there is Malaysia, there is Singapore, and then of course there is India. So I think the US has been conscious, probably even before India, that this poses a great danger to the freedom of the sea lanes, to the freedom of shipping, and that the game of China was to control these lanes and eventually to squeeze the world, from that point. So obviously, again, India is the one country among all these small countries, or the Philippines or Vietnam or even Taiwan, which is, under threat, is the one country that can counter the Chinese, naval presence, ship presence, maritime presence between the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, and hence, to the west. So I think the fact that I don't know whether it was Mr. Trump or whether it was his Secretary of State who said, who called this region as Indo-Pacific instead of Asia-Pacific, is very important, because once again, it's the US, it's neither the UK, nor Europe, nor France, who recognize this danger. It is the US that recognizes the danger. So the US has reinforced. The US is the only one that challenges, Chinese military presence in the sea. And once again, the US has, sounded the alarm. So I think it's very important. It's a bit late already because China is actually controlling these lanes. China is actually, the one that, they have the most ships and the most, warships there. So they're controlling the lanes. But India, of course, is building up its navy. I don't know whether it is with the covert help of the United States or open help of the United States. And eventually, India can, act as a buffer against the Chinese hegemony on the seas. So it's very important that we rename this region as the Secretary of State rightly said, that we rename this region as the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you. So one point, Amjad, you brought in the earlier segment that while India should be at the center, but it should not, all the investment should not go only to India. And I completely agree to that. Coming from India, I know that there is a strong roots or strong, there are old Russia influence, USSR influence are still very strong in many of the, institutions of India. Academia is very leftist in India. And we see that issue even in the US though, but coming to India. So I don't think India should be made so powerful. In fact, it should be, the new alliance should be more global with many more countries and not one country becoming too powerful just to counter China. And I'm coming from India and I'm saying that. Because the mistakes that were done earlier by short-sighted, like for example, USA, got Al-Qaeda and all those came from ultimately Taliban. But who brought them? It was USA to counter Russia or USSR that time for a short-term view or, very short focus. So new alliances should not be short-focused and just kind of, prop up something temporarily to counter current issue. It should be more, it should be thought through, right? That's what my thoughts are. Coming to you in that context, David, that while there is an Indo-Pacific region, the new alliance of Quad, which is the quadrilateral security dialogue, which has US, India, Japan, and Australia. And informally, Quad started in 2010, but took more concrete shape in 2015. But it is still not taken a very concrete shape. It's still kind of very loose.
Yeah.
Do you think Quad needs to be expanded to have little more broader representation to counter China, while the focus of Quad is to deal with the Indo-Pacific region or South China Sea related issues, etc.? Do you think it should be expanded?
Yes, I do. I think it absolutely should be expanded. And rather like Francois had said, I mean, obviously, in the geographical region, there's lots of countries that China bullies, threatens, and is a menace to. So Quad is a good starting point, but it's not the end point. So obviously, again, Francois mentioned them. I mean, there's countries like Vietnam. There's also actually, I might add, countries like New Zealand, and there's other powers, some big, some small. But the one thing they all have in common is that if they can come together in this new kind of emerging, because I think that's what it is. It's an emerging organization. If they can come together in that way, it's in their interests, because individually China can pick off every one of them. Let's be honest about it. But it can't pick off them all, especially if they can unite and then find ways. And this is where, again, we've talked about this previously. We need to be clear on what are the things that need to be done. But for sure, a greater diversity and plurality of nation states in that region, the better. Because, quite frankly, it's very difficult for us, say, Europeans. We don't have the wherewithal to do a tremendous amount in the region. Yes, we do other things, but the actual nations in the region surely should see Quad as a really good starting point, and then that should develop and should expand. And I mean, the way I look upon it is this: what would China not like to see? Well, I would suggest the very thing China doesn't want to see is an expanding Quad. Let's make it a 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 nation, whatever amalgam who see it's in their common interest to come together to counter the threat. It just makes more sense to me that that's done. And the sooner that's done, I might say, the better for all of the nations, and indeed for more broadly than that.
Got it. And since you mentioned about, other countries in Europe, but then as Arif mentioned earlier in the program, and even in the last program that we talked, that many of the small countries also have one vote in the UN, like large countries. So having more in the alliance, while we militarily and other ways counter in the region, we also need alliances to counter in the world organizations like United Nations, Security Council, Human Rights Council, etc.
Yeah.
So having more alliances like-minded and not just temporarily created, as I mentioned, but like-minded who believe in democracy, believe in value, are needed.
Yeah, but see, the problem with that is, I agree, by the way, but here's the problem. The United Nations, as far as I'm concerned, is an anti-democratic cabal. I've got no respect for the United Nations whatsoever.
Yes.
The UN Human Rights Council is another organization that should be disbanded. The World Health Organization, thank goodness President Trump has defunded it. The problem is, Dhiren, there's an expression that we have which it goes like this: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Now, a lot of these organizations, they all started with let's say, good intentions, but where have they gotten? And where they've gotten us is, actually, just go back to something that someone else said. Taiwan, not recognized by China because everyone's scared of China, the big monster China.
Yes,
Taiwan,
Arif brought that.
Yeah,
Arif brought that one.
Arif brought it up. And I'll tell you what, Taiwan on the 30th of December tried to warn the world that there was a real problem, a plague in China. But guess what? Because the WHO doesn't recognize Taiwan, that was ignored. So, I repeat that some of these globalist organizations, I believe, need to be swept away and something better and fresher. And actually, Dhiren, to your point, democratic put in their place. Look at the number of people on for example, UN Security Council that, it's almost surreal when you have nations that have got no respect for democracy, human life, or whatever, sitting on them. So honestly, I believe in root and branch change, and I'm not sure that you can change some of these corrupt, what I call them, corrupt autocracies. They are not democratic. China's bought half of them, and the other half are sort of swindling to get their own private advantage. So we do need to sort of erase so much and try and start again. And the best place to start is nations who believe in common values, respect for human life, respect for the nation state actually as well. Those are the nations that need to come together. So that's how I'd like to see it done.
Got it. Thanks. So Arif, coming to you, and you again talked about about the alliances in terms of how China has been bringing alliance with so many African countries through its predatory investments, right? Coming to G7/G20, right? G7 was formed, and economic alliances are also very important because today it is economy that ultimately determines the power. Military also important, but economy is extremely important tool for your power. And China has recognized that, and it has proved actually the Western countries naive, where China was economically becoming powerful, that world didn't recognize. But anyway, coming to G20 and G7, I think G20 for all practical purpose seems more bureaucratic, with 20 countries not really making much specific progress. G7 was far more relevant, or rather at least made some progress. But now I see that President Trump has invited, right, 3 more countries to the next G7 meeting: India, Australia, and South Korea. And we also talked about right now the need for expanding Quad. Do you see these things coming together? G7 expanded, G7 amalgamating into Quad, like David also kind of alluded to.
Well, Mehta ji, before coming to that, I will with due respect, disagree with one of your points. As you said that you come from India and you don't agree that empowering one country so much that it becomes, I won't agree here because again we can compare with the voting system. A small country's vote and a large country's vote. So here also India, a country of 1.3 billion people, of course they have more potential. They have more people, skilled labor, and they have more things to provide to the world. So of course it will have bigger share due to its bigger size in population.
So I'll just tell you why I said that, because my concern that there is a strong leftist roots still in many institutions in India, and with economy growing, I don't want them to take over once they come to power, because India, it's still democracy. Anybody can win in the election, forming some very, very crude alliance. So there is a big issue of that I see. That was my, not as a country.
And the issue was that there are already United States, European Union, two strong components of this alliance if India is part of that alliance. So there won't be ever one country stronger in the alliance. Now your question about G7 and G20 and all these things, I will totally agree with David on his points that these international organs are irrelevant. I spent 25 years in United Nations Human Rights Council, and I just feel helpless and hopeless. And I see world powers speaking against each other on the floor and then sitting in cafeteria and enjoying their time. And we see a hypocrisy going on. So yes, there is a need, not as David said, that sweep away all this. I am also very extremist in this suggestion that yes, there is a need to change, to reform every international organization, WTO, ILO, WHO, UNESCO, UNICEF, UNHRC, all these are failed institutions. Now these new alliances, like as you said, new countries are invited for next G7 meetings. Yes, new alliances are very much important for many reasons. Before, we had alliance of NATO to stop expansion of communism on eastern borders of Europe, and it came until East Germany, and it was expanding. So NATO was a very specific alliance which served its purpose, and now the purpose is over. So the NATO alliance is almost over. I remember Turkey was also part of this NATO, but now Turkey is here and there, and
Turkey has become extremist.
Now Khalifa, because in Turkey there is Khilafah movement almost there. Because I don't see these people, Arab Khan and Abdullah Gul are going anywhere in next 10, 20 years. Turkey is occupied. Although Muslims in entire world, they prefer Mia Khalifa than Turkish Khalifa. But still, Turkey has lost its way. New alliances will pave the way to bring changes in the stratocracies also. Because after all, human rights are nowhere in stratocracies like Pakistan. We don't have any human rights. Even on human rights, the Pakistanis, they put their status human rights there, but they don't know what are the human rights. So human rights, democratic values, after all, these are defined philosophies of running countries around the world. So a new alliance with, for example, countries like India, Europe, America, Australia, Canada, they are strong democracies. They have people say people can raise their voice, freedom of speech is there, freedom of expression is there, freedom of faith, belief is there. So these alliances can make this world better. So yes, not only expansion of G7, but many other new alliances has to be brought in, and agreements also to bring stronger cultural and democratic values.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks. So, Mr. Amjad, since you talked about, one belt, one road, and especially CPEC, what kind of alliances specifically need? Because that is a big threat to the world, over going through CPEC and then acquiring a port of Gwadar. So there is a local focus also needed while we talk about the global and more of South China Sea related Quad, etc. But there is a need to also counter this western side of the Pakistan, China corridor, etc. What kind of alliance do you need to counter that? And I will also extend that question to some extent, that if that corridor, which is the Pakistan occupied, illegally occupied Kashmir, is liberated, then it will open up a path or a road directly accessing from India to Afghanistan. There is a patch, actually, almost 40-kilometer road or the border that Pakistan occupied Kashmir shares, which is rightfully India, with Afghanistan, and it will open up access directly to Afghanistan, which was probably the reason why Pakistan was given so much of importance so far. So what do you think is needed to kind of, make that happen?
You see, why do we need new alliance or alliances? What generates the need for new alliances? To my mind, a new alliance is required to contain territorial expansion of China. That is number one. And how is China making that territorial expansion? Through this one belt, one road, by controlling, building dry ports, taking control of key seaports, which have got both a dual function of acting as a commerce port and also as a military strategic port. Now, the second thing is the alliance is required also to protect the world and the vulnerable countries from China's debt trap diplomacy. It gives money, it enslaves you in that money. And Sri Lanka is an example, but I don't want to go into that detail at the moment. So the new alliance that we are, I think, discussing now should have two main objectives. Number one, to guarantee the territorial sovereignty of vulnerable nations from Chinese expansionism. Number two, it has to also come up with a fund, a mutual fund. Now in BRICS, we tried that, we failed. We failed because China wanted, they were going to set up $100 billion worth of new development bank or something. But China wanted most of the share in that. And India wanted equal share. There were 5 countries, they wanted 20 billion each country should contribute. China wanted to contribute more so that they can, have control over it. So it failed. So we need a fund so that can help us to sort out trade deficits from going out of control. Trade deficit is a good thing because it generates production, it generates exports. It's a healthy element. Only when it gets out of control and there's an imbalance, that there's a danger. Now, we are heading for regional wars, whether you are a pacifist or whatever, or a dreamer. But the truth of the matter is, in today's situation, we are heading towards regional wars. I mean, in the Middle East, and that is a regional war. Libya, Syria, Turkey, all involved in. That's a regional war, backed up by superpowers like Russia and America, and even China has got stakes in them.
Saudi Arabia,
absolutely. So this new alliance has to have a program you know. It has to have a program, and the program for and that is territorial and finance, these two things. So for territorial, the top thing on the agenda should be that this new alliance has to be led by India. You know, there has to be a leader. I'm not saying that led by India means that India is going to infringe on other people's sovereignty or, you know, territorial integrity. What I mean is that it is the biggest economy in the region, and it has to play a leading role. It has the money, it has the resources, you know, so it has to play a leading role. And the first thing it should have on the agenda has to be the territorial sovereignty to re-establish the territorial sovereignty of occupied territories in our region. And on that, Gilgit-Baltistan is on the top list. Balochistan, you know, these, other than that, new alliance is useless. If we already have Quad can go and join G7 and expand themselves, and we can sit and, as Arif has said, UN and all these failed organizations are there for a cup of tea, and we can go and have. But we, the people of Gilgit-Baltistan, are fed up. We, the people of POK, are fed up. With or without the support of India, we are going to join hands with the Baloch, and we are going to kick the Pakistan army out of our territory, because we are starving, we are dying. We need 300,000 bags of wheat immediately, and Pakistan has cut down our quota from 1 million bags a year. It has cut down our quota. And on top of that quota, we needed 300,000 bags. So we are fed up. Whether India likes it or does not like it, whether there are pacifists among the panel, there is going to be war.
Got it.
Now, in order to make this war contained and smaller and quick and less devastating for the region, India has to come up and play a role. You can't hide your head like an ostrich in the sand.
Got it. So what you're saying is that while there is a global alliance, there is a need for a regional alliance to handle these particular regions' issues and create a way to separate Gilgit-Baltistan, Balochistan from Pakistan, and also create a road connectivity directly from India to Afghanistan, right? And isolate also bring isolation or buffer between Pakistan and China. Okay, good. Thanks a lot.
The time for one global or big global alliances, that time is over, for at least for now. This is the time for regional alliances, and regional alliances will negotiate among themselves.
Got it. Thank you.
Dhiren, if I could just jump in, just very, very, very briefly, just to say, first of all, Amjad, I can't speak for the others, but I'm no pacifist, right? Secondly, I have publicly called for the breakup of Pakistan and for the freedoms of the people that you've mentioned, because I consider Pakistan to be a failed terrorist, globalist incubator that has no place in the civilized world whatsoever. So completely aligned with you in that. But whilst, and again, I have complete sympathy for everything you say. But as Dhiren said, there's regional issues, and there are global issues, which I know you understand. And it's so difficult to try and balance the two, because I know people are starving. I know I've total sympathy for that. But by the same token, we do have to deal with, like, for example, China's just brought the world to its knees thanks to coronavirus. So, you know, we've got to deal with that as well, haven't we?
Got it. Thanks. So we are running out of time, but we have last two questions. Francois, coming to you, right? So you initially mentioned about the, BRICS, why it was formed, and we also talked in this program that India needs to continue in scope just to have a say and counter if we don't have all in China puppet countries are there, then probably we may not be able to counter. So that was a good point. My question, little expanding on that, while India continues in BRICS maybe for some time and in scope, how India can be more aggressive in putting forth not just its own issue, but the global issues, countering China and to some extent Russia in these alliances, to make sure that India becomes the voice of the world, because it is in those alliances right now. And if they continue, can India become a voice of world in those alliances and give freedom, as Amjad Bhai was saying, give freedom to that region, and at least do something to get freedom for that region.
Exactly.
I think you mentioned that India, should not become too powerful, but actually, India is very shy about its power. India last 70 years, the foreign policy of India is very timid. And I don't think there's a great change. There's a little bit of change with the present government, but basically, foreign policy in India is decided by bureaucrats. I mean, Mr. Modi, is a very strong personality, and he's tried to, impress upon, the nation, his own vision. But as far as foreign policy, I think it's still dictated by the high bureaucrats in Delhi, and it it's not changed much. So, I don't see a great change into India's foreign policy toward China, and we see at the moment that. Although, you can say that India is more forceful toward the Chinese, that there is a little bit of military buildup, they have developed the infrastructure. They're still, like 5 to 10 years behind China in terms of infrastructure, in terms of, power, military power, in terms of, willpower. The willpower of India. Again, I would like to speak about the Dalai Lama, because if there is one thing that upsets the Chinese, it is the Dalai Lama. I mean, they're not scared of India. They think that India is inferior. And I believe they think that the whole world is inferior to the Chinese, including the United States and Europe. But as far as India, they believe that India is even more inferior than the US and Europeans. So they're not scared of India at all. They think that this is why they're so bold. They think that if there's a war, they're again going to humiliate India. But I don't think so personally. But if there's one thing that I've said, that it's just a word, you just pronounce the word Dalai Lama, and the Chinese were very, logical, very intelligent people. They lose all kind of, balance. They become totally irrational and mad. So why is not India using the Dalai Lama? First, he's a yogi. He's an extraordinary person. He's a Nobel Prize. Then we know the importance of Tibet. As a buffer between these two giants. As a non-violent buffer. Between the two nuclear giants. So why not use the Dalai Lama? I mean,
yes.
Mr. Modi is not. The Dalai Lama is not allowed to do anything. He's not allowed to speak. He's not allowed to move. He needs the permission from Delhi for going anywhere. Now, China wants to grab Arunachal Pradesh, like it wants to grab Taiwan, wants to grab Arunachal Pradesh. Now, there is a very strong Tibetan community. I've been there in Tawang, in the top of Arunachal Pradesh, with the border with Tibet. So why not allow the Dalai Lama to go there and to preach? But India is not doing so. So the foreign policy of India has not changed. I do not think that India is going to do anything drastic. Neither come out of BRICS nor come out of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because they're very timid. They're very timid. Well, unless China really provokes India into a war, and I believe that India is much more ready for a war now than it was in 1962. India is not going to do much. I'm sorry, because I love India, and I do think the Chinese are very dangerous people. So coming back to alliances, United States needs to force the hand of India. They need to force the hand of India in being the buffer that the world needs against the Chinese danger. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And coming to our last question, we have definitely exceeded time like we do every time because of the passionate discussions we have. But coming to last question, and that to you, David, just recently, just 3 days back, parliamentarians of 8 countries, and these are not government but more of a parliamentarian of 8 countries, from Japan to Australia to many European countries like Germany and EU, US, UK, Sweden, Norway. They announced an alliance, right? So what do you think about that alliance, which is essentially the Parliamentary Alliance on China? It is also named specifically as Parliamentary Alliance on China. What do you see the this alliance. I think it's a good move because it is by parliamentarian and not by government. So there is more ground level support, and they are from both the parties. If you look at in UK, you look at in US, they're cutting across party.
Yeah, I think it's to be absolutely welcomed, and actually, in a way, it sums up a lot that we've talked about today. Because what's driving it is the fundamental recognition that democratic countries around the world have got to find ways to work more coherently with each other to hold China to account. And if you look through, for example, what this particular interparliamentary body is seeking to do, it's exactly that. And as you say, Dhiren, in the UK, for example, it's got both parties. It's got the Conservatives and Labour. Similarly, we're in Canada, in the States, in the European Union, which is interesting. They're part of it. So I just see this is another example of the changing alliances, a kind of a global awakening to the fact that, hey, we've got a problem and we've got to find ways to deal with it. So be they economic, be they political, be they diplomatic. There's loads of ways that you can skin the Chinese cat, so to speak. But we have to start. And so I see this as it's quite amazing actually to see all these initiatives happening very, very quickly. My only concern is it's very late in the day. In 2020, China is so much further towards its global ambitions than it was 20 years ago. So, it's going to be very difficult. For example, in the UK, we've got China building our only atomic power station. Well, what could go wrong with that idea? We've got China via Huawei trying to integrate into our 5G communication network. Well, what could go wrong with that? So what we've got to do is, as one example, we have to consider the fact that we have to extricate the tendrils that China has sent across the world into the UK, but into every other country as well, and find ways to get them out, cut them out like a cancer. Because if they don't, as has been said in this past conversation we've had, China will eat us up. I think, Arif, you used the terminology, it will devour us. And I am absolutely clear in that. So that's why I welcome any alliance of fellow-minded individuals, be they this parliamentary committee or be they a revised and expanded G7, whatever it takes to try and bring like-minded countries that value all the fundamental freedoms that we all do, bring us together and help us confront China and in that way save the world for the benefit of humanity. So it's as simple as that. I welcome this committee.
Thank you, panelists. With that, we'll end today. Just a last. I think we need the new alliances that are formed on a long-term vision that includes only democracies and not theocratic countries or dictators, that are formed with a vision of a better and equitable world. And more importantly, I think this COVID, howsoever unfortunate it is, has probably changed the temperature of the water that was heating up, and all the world countries like frog were kind of were to get boiled out. I think the temperature changed and suddenly there is a realization. IPEC is a good initiative. Expanded G7, which is what we are seeing now, move towards that is a good something that comes. And to Amjad's point, regional also actions are needed. India has to take lead in separating the parts of Jammu and Kashmir that is illegally occupied, and Balochistan, which was never part of Pakistan, which was acquired illegally by Pakistan just after the Pakistan got created. And India was timid that time. They proposed to Nehru or India to join India, but Nehru did not bother to, agree to have Balochistan part of India, while Pakistan had Bangladesh, East Pakistan, and West Pakistan. They were two separate regions, but somehow India didn't bother to get Balochistan in its fold. So those past mistakes needs to be corrected. But thank you so much, panelists. And with that, we end our program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.